IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, October 8th. We are out of the bye, and the best part of this crazy weekend of upsets was that Notre Dame didn't play this weekend, and there was no chance they were going to get upset. What a wild weekend of college football. And one matchup between ranked teams, and it turned into a weekend of absolute craziness. A lot of it impacted Notre Dame positively. Coming up to another huge weekend on the college football docket. I think there's like 4 or 5 games between ranked opponents. And, of course, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish have a rivalry game this weekend. Trevor, my man Trevor Trowbridge is joining me today. I'm Brian Driscoll, as you guys know. And we're going to talk about this matchup between Notre Dame and Stanford, Trevor. And we're going to have a really fun week breaking this down because this is a very intriguing football team because in some ways they're not very good. In other ways, they actually kind of concern me, and we're going to talk about that. This is a rivalry game. This is a much better Stanford team than the one that beat Notre Dame 2 years ago, even though they're still not that good. So we're going to talk about that. Today we're going to kind of talk big picture about the game and dive into some of the matchup parts of it. Tomorrow, we'll get into more of the statistical matchups, more of the micro aspect of this breakdown. We'll talk game records. And, of course, Trevor, it's Wednesday. It's buy, sell, hold, right? So we'll have that tomorrow. Thursday, we will do we'll have our keys to victory. We'll do our predictions for the game. And then Bill Bender and I will then preview the huge weekend of college football this weekend, man. I think we're predicting 4 games. I normally try to keep it to 2 or 3, and we're going to predict 4 because it's I don't know which one not to do. So we'll preview all that. And, of course, Friday mailbag before we have the big game on Saturday. So Notre Dame and Stanford on Saturday, 3:30 p.m. on NBC and Peacock. Notre Dame is currently a 22.5-point favorite. I never like those kind of spreads because, they're just the ones where Notre Dame just doesn't seem to cover those ones. They cover a lot of the other ones. But 22.5-point spread as of today was 23.5 yesterday. Stanford is 2-3 on the season so far, Trevor. And it's it's a rivalry that I did not grow up with as a rivalry. It didn't really become a quote-unquote rivalry until the 90s, meaning that Notre Dame played Stanford when I was a kid. As a matter of fact, lost a couple times to Stanford during the Lou Holtz era, lost once to a Dennis Green coach football team, and then lost again to a Bill Walsh coach football team. And now it's in the late 90s. It became a game that's an every-year game. It was dominated by Notre Dame for a long time. And then this dude, Jim Harbaugh, showed up with this cat named David Shaw to one side. And he had, I'm trying to remember the name of the D coordinator they had on the other side. He was the head coach for the Broncos. I cannot believe I'm drawing a blank here on this deal. But, they became a much different football team during that time, Trevor. Brian Kelly actually finished his career, I believe, with a losing record against Stanford. If I remember correctly, he ended his career with a losing record against Stanford. I'm actually going to look that up. So from 2010 to the time Brian Kelly departed in 2021, let's see here. Stanford went 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Yep, 6-5 or 5-6, 5-6 against Stanford. So Brian Kelly did not have very many teams he had a losing record against outside of the Bamas, the Georgias, teams like that. But this is one he had a losing record on, 5-6. And I don't think he beat a single Stanford. He beat one Stanford team, I believe, that finished the year ranked in the top 25. Maybe 2. I think the 2018 might have finished. The 2012 team, I believe, is the only Stanford team that finished the season ranked in the top 25. So I'm actually going to look that up as well. But they had a couple years where they beat teams that weren't ranked very high. In 2012, they finished 7th. 2014, they finished unranked. 2015, they lost to him. 2016, they lost to him. 2017, they finished 20th and Notre Dame lost him. And then they did not finish the season ranked in 2018. So Brian Kelly only beat one Stanford team that finished the season ranked in the top 25. So that was a rivalry game that Notre Dame got dominated early on, had a little bit better success later in the year. And it became, Trevor, during that period of time, a rivalry that meant a lot more than it ever had. Stanford starting to beat Notre Dame for recruits and all those type of things. And so now we're in a situation where Notre Dame has an opportunity to once again take over control of this series. But it's not going to be easy, Trevor. This is going to be a game where we're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame football team, not just from what they do on the field, but how are they up here and how are they right here coming out of a bye against an inferior opponent, this is one of those games where if you overlook them, like they did 2 years ago, it can get a little bit tricky. If you take the game seriously, then you should be able to roll. And so we're going to find out a lot about this Notre Dame football team coming out of this game. So let's dive into what's at stake for this game, Trevor. And we talked about it. It's a rivalry game. It's interesting that we're calling it that because, honestly, when I was a kid, I never would have thought this is a rival for Notre Dame. But here we are. I think the Jim Harbaugh era and then the David Shaw era changed things a bit. And now we're going to find out, Trevor, moving forward, if this is going to remain a rivalry. Notre Dame is not, and Stanford do not have each other scheduled, I believe, past next season. So we're going to find out here real soon if this remains a rivalry. But this is, as I mentioned, Trevor, the biggest thing about this game, this is an opportunity, big picture, not about the 2024 season, but big picture, this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to retake control of this series. They've won 4 of the last 5. They obviously won last year 56-23, although they were losing for a chunk of the first half. Lost that game in 2022. You've won 4 out of 5. It should be 5 in a row had you not choked that game away. Can you win this one and make it 5 out of 6 and then 2 in a row, and then you can kind of make the 22 game an anomaly? Or do you struggle again and you realize that this Notre Dame football team hasn't changed? It is still a team that one week can look great. Another week can go on, can come out and beat a ranked football team, can go on the road and beat a ranked football team, but they can drop games like this. So is this going to be like 22 again, Trevor, where you drop the game early to a Marshall, Northern Illinois type of team? You seem to get things back on track. You win 3 in a row, and then boom, what happens? You lose to a team like Stanford, which is exactly what happened for Notre Dame in 2022, Trevor. Notre Dame comes out, loses their first 2 games, and then they did what? They won 3 in a row. They had a win over a ranked team in BYU. They go home the next week, and boom, a Stanford team whose only win in a calendar year was over Colgate beat you at home. And that's what we're going to learn is, are they finally starting to get past that version of Notre Dame that can look great, smashing North Carolina and Drake May on the road, can go on a neutral field, convincingly beat BYU, more convincingly than the final score might show, and then come home, and then that's what we see. That's the first big picture thing that's at stake for this game, Trevor. This is going to tell us a lot about where this team is from a focus and a maturity standpoint.
I think it's easy to look at this matchup and say, yeah, Stanford's 2-3, doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. Well, historically, based on what the perception of Marcus Freeman is, these are the games that he drops. Now, there are signs that point in a positive direction. Marcus Freeman is 3-0 coming off of a bye week. Notre Dame, after a slow start, handled Stanford last year on the road, which, grand scheme of the series history, I believe Notre Dame didn't get a win at Stanford. They won at Stanford in 2007, and then won again at Stanford in 2019. And outside of that, I don't think they won on the road. So
you are
if
correct.
You're anything, yeah,
that
so
was
if
a
you're
3-9 Stanford team. It wasn't even a good Stanford team yet.
Yeah. So if you're anything like me, I am happy that this game is taking place in South Bend. I always just get that weird feeling when Notre Dame goes to play Stanford in California. So you hit the nail on the head there, Brian. This has a chance for Notre Dame to course correct and kind of start putting some of those games that we want to start labeling as an anomaly behind them. Because up to this point, it's kind of a flip of a coin what Notre Dame team is going to show up when they do play the 2 and 3 teams of the world. Because let's call a spade here. Stanford, despite the fact that they are in some areas improved from where they were at last year, this is still not the greatest football team. So Notre Dame has a lot of chances to kind of rewrite the narrative with what people view at a national level of this program, that they'll show up for the big games and they'll sleepwalk through the easier games on the schedule. Because this is a Stanford team that has the potential to hurt you. I know we'll dive into it later in this show, and I'm excited to start getting to it, Brian.
Trevor, when you talk about the matchup, it is interesting, though. Playing out there was kind of a problem. I mean, it really was. My first game watching Notre Dame at Stanford was 2011, and they lost that game. I was not out there for the 13 game. I was out there for the 15 game, and I was out there for the 17 game. So I watched 3 straight losses in California. Now, fortunately for Notre Dame, they've won their last 3 at Stanford, and all by convincing margins, but it does make you a little bit nervous, especially since this is a better version of those Stanford teams. This is by no means a vintage Stanford team, guys. They're 2-3. They just got beat by 24 points at home to Virginia Tech. I'm not going to try to spin this that this is a good Stanford team. What I am going to say is this is a dangerous Stanford team if you don't come into this game and play locked-in football. And that's the point Trevor and I are making here is this is a team that can beat you in the same way Northern Illinois beat you, in the way that Stanford beat you 2 years ago, the way that Marshall beat you. I shouldn't even say Marshall because Marshall's still a good football team and actually had much better NFL talent on both sides of the ball, I believe, than what Northern Illinois did this year and certainly what Stanford did 2 years ago. So it's one of those games where if you bring the same energy you brought against Northern Illinois, you seem to bring the same energy you had against Miami, Ohio, this game could be a lot more competitive than it's supposed to be. This is a game where if Notre Dame comes out locked in, however, this won't be a competitive game. I mean, again, we try to always be on. We don't try. We're always honest with you guys. And we're not going to sit here and try to convince you that this is going to be a really competitive game and Stanford's got this and Stanford's got that. And if Notre Dame brings their A game, it's going to be a dogfight for 60 minutes. If Notre Dame plays B-plus football, this will be a minimum 2-touchdown game. Minimum 2-touchdown game. But that was also true for Northern Illinois. If they would have brought a B game, they win that game by 10 points at least. Yeah. And so that's the thing where we're at with this matchup, Trevor, is this is a team that you should be convincingly, but a team that can be dangerous. Like, look, I just watched a week ago, sitting on my couch, hanging out, no Notre Dame game, and I'm watching an inferior Vanderbilt team. And I mean inferior, like, look, Vanderbilt played great in that game and did not fear Alabama, battled their butts off the whole game. But this is also a Vanderbilt team that 3 weeks before lost to Georgia State. That, 2 weeks before lost in overtime to a Missouri team that I don't think is that good. So I believe Vanderbilt's better than Stanford, but they're not on the same level as Bama. But Bama came in, not focused, not locked in, and they got beat. I saw a Tennessee team that has a superior roster to Arkansas get punched in the mouth and not respond well and lose that game, right? I mean, we see this a lot, and we've especially seen it in this season where inferior rosters who have an infusion of players that just don't fear the big boys like they used to. And they say, well, Northern Illinois came into the stadium with no fear of Notre Dame. Miami came into the stadium with no fear of Notre Dame. Stanford will come into this game, Trevor, with no fear of Notre Dame because there's going to be a decent amount of kids on this roster that were at the game 2 years ago and then are going to, the coaches are going to spin it. Like, guys, we had a 16-14 lead late in the second quarter against Notre Dame last year, and then we started turning the ball over. We had these mistakes. We had those mistakes. We had a blocked kick, which is all true. They're not going to come into the stadium afraid of Notre Dame. This is going to have to be a game that Notre Dame is going to earn, Trevor. And if they're able to earn a convincing win, then we say, okay, this is another step in the right direction. Not that they beating Stanford in and of itself convincingly isn't like a bring on, Texas or Ohio State, but it says, okay, they're turning the corner. They're putting that other mess behind them. And they're going to, it's another step towards saying, hey, maybe they are finally getting to the point where, this is a locked in football team. And the other thing too, Trevor, this will tie, if they're able to win this game, this will tie the longest regular season winning streak in Marcus Freeman's tenure. It'll be the fourth win for Notre Dame. Last season, their longest winning streak was 4. And in 2022, their longest winning – oh, I'm sorry. I'm incorrect. 5. They had 5 in a row in 2022. So I take that back. So they're still 1 game away from that. But it goes to show that this is not a team that's been able to string together long winning streaks under Marcus Freeman. They just have, 3-4 games, boom. 3-4 games, boom. Can they avoid that against Stanford? And that's what I'm saying. It's not about Stanford. It's about Notre Dame. And it's about, is Notre Dame going to say, okay, we don't care about the team on the other sideline from the standpoint of obviously there's a respect there. You got to study them. But this is about us playing to our quote-unquote gold standard, which they chant every day in practice and chant in the lodge. No, TGS, the gold standard. Well, are you going to live up to that? Regardless of who's on the other side. Because that's the thing. This team is good about living up to that when they're playing at Texas A&M and to a degree playing at Louisville. And Ohio State comes to town and they're going to play their butts off in that game. But can you also do that when Stanford's come to town? When you watch the film and there's a dangerous team in some regards, but this is also a team we should beat convincingly. Can you do it then? That's the first big picture aspect that I'm looking for in this game, Trevor, to tell us where's this Notre Dame team mentally and emotionally and from a focus standpoint to say, hey, we're going to take care of this game.
Well, if last weekend showed you anything, right, it's that any team can be beat on any Saturday. And for Notre Dame, if you go back and you look at the painful losses, yes, Marshall was a better team than some of the aforementioned teams that we had brought up, but it's still Marshall. You're still Notre Dame. So you think of the Marshall loss, the Northern Illinois loss, the close win against Toledo, the close win against Cal, like all of these games historically, you start to get in the conversation of it is more of a Notre Dame versus a Notre Dame type of game. Not to disrespect any of the opponents that are and have been on the schedule and that will be on the schedule, but these are the games where Marcus Freeman needs to start turning around, where Notre Dame can't beat Notre Dame. And I firmly believe that that's not on Saturday on the field. That happens in preparation. That happens the week of. And so Marcus Freeman, especially now with the bye week, has the opportunity to take the first step to change that narrative. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that if Marcus Freeman comes out and beats Stanford by 2 touchdowns and everybody's going to forget the bad losses. No, that's never going to go away. But you can slowly start putting those farther back in the rear view mirror, which has to be top of mind for this team, because now you have a 3-game stretch before your next bye week to really start putting away opponents. Brian, you and I talked about it. The eye test is going to start being huge for Notre Dame, because as of right now, I don't think Notre Dame has another ranked opponent on their schedule. So not only do you have to go in and win, you have to go in and now win by a lot. And you have to prove that you are that dominant team.
They will have probably some ranked teams when they play. Yep. I would imagine Navy or Army are going to be ranked when they play. If you look at their schedules, and USC, Army, and Navy are 3 of the 4 highest ranked teams in the others receiving votes category. But let's be honest, Trevor. A win over a ranked Army or ranked Navy is not something you're going to hang your – if you're hanging your resume on that, then your resume is not great. Now, USC, I think, is going to get back in there. I mean, we'll see what they do against Penn State this week. And they beat Penn State at home this weekend, and all of a sudden, boom, they're in the top 20 again, right? I mean, so there's a lot of that. But your point stands is you're now relying on other people to win games so you can get style points. Here's the style points you need to get. Go out there and smack people. Just punish people. And that's what Notre Dame needs to learn how to do. And you don't do that by saying, well, we've got to get style points. You do that by saying, we are going to play to our standard. We're going to play hard-nosed physical football with focus, intensity, and passion because we're Notre Dame, not because we're playing Texas A&M. And that's where the leadership of this football team needs to take over, Trevor, because and it starts at the coaching level, but it also has to go down to the player level. Like, look, it's easy to blame Marcus Freeman for that. And, of course, there are things Marcus Freeman could have done differently and should have done differently in preparation for Northern Illinois. But as someone who played college football at a lower level, who's coached in college football, who has been around these Notre Dame football teams for years, the best Notre Dame teams that I saw and covered were self-motivated football teams. They were teams that said, we don't care about what coach does. We don't care about what this guy does. We're going to go out there and ball because that's who we are. And those are things that you look at and say, where is the leadership on the player level at for this weekend as well? Because if you come out with that intensity, with that chip on your shoulder, yeah, the coaches can enhance that a little bit, Trevor. But if you guys are coming in there with poor player leadership, at some point in time, that what the coaches do don't matter. That's a general statement. I'm not saying Notre Dame has poor player leadership. I'm using it as an example. If you have good player leadership, then there's going to be a lot of accountability with the way you're preparing and the energy and the emotion you're showing in practice. I mean, there should be situations where if a captain should be able to go up to Coach Freeman, like, Coach, man, we need to bring this in real quick. This is bull crap. And then Coach needs to let that happen. Or you get in the locker room and say, everybody in the locker room right now, you know what I mean? And you say, look, this is unacceptable. There's got to be that too, because when this team plays with an edge, they're very dangerous. We saw that early against Louisville 2 weeks ago. But here's the deal: a little adversity hit. You fumble a ball, your quarterback gets his wind knocked down, and all of a sudden, okay, let's just get into win this game mode and get out of here. And then all of a sudden, Louisville starts coming back, and I want to see this team come out with an edge from a player standpoint, but also from a coaching standpoint. Yeah. And that's kind of the final piece of this intro section, Trevor, is, look, Notre Dame and Stanford have this long history, and Notre Dame, I think, is 23 and 14 all time against Stanford. And 8 of those 14 wins came from 2009 on, but there's some Stanford teams that ruined some really good potential Notre Dame seasons under Lou Holtz. But this, again, is not a Stanford team that is like those teams. This isn't an Andrew Luck coached led football team. This is one of those games where, yes, it's a rivalry and all this other kind of stuff, but this is one of those, this is about us games. And part of that is the head coach also can't tamp down the expectations or the play. He's got to come out and say, hey, we are going to be aggressive in this game. Coordinators, I'm demanding early dominance. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean throwing bombs. That's not what I mean by aggressive. But you're coming out with an attitude of we're taking it to you on both sides of the ball. And there was a comment that Marcus Freeman made, Trevor, in the press conference that gave me hope that he is going to look at this game a little differently than he did in Northern Illinois. And I'll read you the quote that he said. He was kind of introing the Stanford game. And I always get a little bit nervous about games like this because you wonder, okay, where's the head coach's mind at? Is he going to be like, hey, we just got to focus on us and all this other kind of stuff, which is fine. I mean, you do need to do that.
Sure.
And how's he going to feel about the game from 2 years ago? Is it kind of out of his mind? Does he not think about it? Is he doesn't want to bring it up? It's like it's in the past. He said this comment this is not being asked a question. This was before Q&A started. This is his intro to the press conference. Marcus Freeman said, obviously, 2 years ago, they came in here and they beat us. And last year in the second quarter, we were down, I think, 14-13 at one point. So we really have to prepare. I was really happy when I heard that comment because I'm like, okay, he's not going to try to get them to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. And that's partly why they came in with an edge against Louisville because they were not pretending we're not worried about last year. This is a different team. No, you use that emotional push to get your team focused on payback. Hey, guys, last time that team, and that was a worse team than the one we're playing now. Now, I'd leave out the part that we're better than we were then if I'm Marcus Freeman, right? That's but this is a better Stanford team than the one that beat us 2 years ago. We went into that week. We sleptwalked through that week. We made excuses. We thought we were hot stuff. We had beaten this team. We'd beaten BYU. We'd smacked North Carolina. We had righted the ship, and we were good. We were golden. We were cruising again. And we let that team come into us and push us around for 60 minutes, and which they did. I mean, they absolutely did. And last year we came out again thinking we were going to roll this team and et cetera, et cetera. That's good because, as I said before the Louisville game, and I'm going to say it again, Marcus Freeman's better when he's pissed off. This football team is better when they're kind of got something to be pissed about, whether it's disrespect from the media or being booed by the fans or getting paid. I don't care what the motivation is. I just want you pissed off. I mean, that's my thing, Trevor, because when this team is pissed off, we get a version of Notre Dame that is very hard to beat for anyone in college football, even with all the injuries. Like, think about this, Trevor. We got a pissed off version of Notre Dame against Louisville, okay? And I was talking to somebody last night about this. Do y'all realize the circumstances of that Louisville game? That's a good Louisville football team. Well, they just lost to SMU. You mean the SMU team whose only loss is a 3-point road loss to a current undefeated team that's in the top 20 in BYU, that who blew out Florida State the week before, who blew out TCU 2 weeks before that or week before that? Okay, it's a bad loss for Louisville. They were at home, but that's a good SMU football team. And there was a little bit of a letdown game from Louisville because they put so much into the Notre Dame game. But here's the thing. You were missing 3 starting offensive linemen. You were missing the guy that had been your best tight end through the first 4 games of the season. You were missing your starting Viper. You're missing one of your key rotation players at D tackle. Your replacement starting Viper gets hurt in the second quarter. Your starting middle linebacker gets hurt, or will linebacker gets hurt in the first half. He's hobbling around the whole first and second quarter. He's out in the second half. And your starting cornerback, who'd been playing excellent football so far this season, is out for the game. You had all that out. And then Jadarian Price, your best big play weapon, let's be real, it's your best big play weapon, gets benched in the second quarter and doesn't come back in the game. Effectively the same as an injury, no longer playing. And that football team still went out and beat a ranked football team in a game they controlled. And I made this point to a friend. So, look, I don't like that they kind of, packed it in. And he's like, well, the offense. I said, look, I get all that. But here's the reality of it. Every time Louisville made it a game, Notre Dame went down and scored. So like, yeah, I didn't like that they did this and did that, but you were missing all that. Oh, and by the way, you were also missing Josh Burnham, who had been your best big end in the first 2 games before he got hurt. But
Ben Morrison for a couple series.
That's right. So because that team was focused and a little bit pissed and all the different things, we saw a version of that team that said, okay, don't care about all this. No excuses for all this. We're going to go out here and we're going to get this thing done. If we can get that emotional version of this team back on this week, you're getting Burnham back. Oh, by the way, Jordan Faison also got knocked out of that game, right? I mean, so you get Burnham back, you get Christian Gray back, maybe you get Cooper Flanagan back. Now it's like, hey, guys, you're getting some reinforcements coming in here. Now it's time to go out there and handle business. And so that's why I say, Trevor, man, we're going to learn a lot about where this team is, because I don't care who's missing from Notre Dame's lineup. If they go out and play Notre Dame football, this is a win. And that's just the reality of it. But as we've seen, we don't always get this team playing Notre Dame football. Or we could say Notre Dame football is this. And honestly, that's kind of been true. So that's why I say, like, I want to see – it's easy to get up for Louisville. They were highly ranked and, undefeated. Can this team emotionally get up for a team like Stanford as well? That's going to tell us a lot about where this team's head is coming into this matchup.
I think you touched on it. The win against Louisville for Notre Dame was so huge in that it instilled the confidence in them that they have playmakers at every position that can come in and step up and perform, not just go and fill a void on the depth chart, but can come in. And there's almost like there's no lapse in performance. Like you and I have said, like a lot of people have said with Irish Breakdown through, looking at past Notre Dame teams, you have a guy get injured and there is a clear drop-off in performance with what happens. I mean, look at the playoff game against Clemson when Julian Love gets hurt. You had at one point in the time in the game against Louisville, Ben Morrison was in the locker room. Christian Gray was sidelined with an injury. You have a true freshman in Leonard Moore playing boundary, and Jordan Clark, your nickel, playing field corner. And the defense still performed. Look, it's moments like that have to instill confidence in a football team, which makes me believe that when you go into weeks like this, it instills the confidence in you to say, yeah, we can go out and beat anybody. Not saying that they're looking at this Stanford team saying, yo, based on how we played against Louisville, now we have a shot to beat Stanford. Not saying that at all. I'm saying now it's going to start giving you the confidence of, now we're going to start beating teams like how we should go out and beat teams. And that's one of the things that I really hope that Notre Dame does moving forward with this next 3-game stretch here. And I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly with Marcus Freeman. I hope he opens up the coaching staff. And that comment that he made in the opening press conference gave me a little bit of hope and confidence that that's going to be the case. But what I'm going to be looking for on top of – Notre Dame does a halfway decent job of starting the game on offense relatively quickly. They've scored on more opening drives this season than not. It's what's that going to start to look like midway through the second quarter and starting the third quarter. I want the foot on the gas pedal for 4 quarters. Not, all right, cool, we're up by 2 touchdowns. We're good at any point in the game. So what I'm going to be looking to see from Marcus Freeman and the staff on Saturday. So they have a chance to start course correcting and changing that narrative. And I hope that they do it.
So, Trevor, that's going to do it for section 1. We're going to next dive into kind of a look at the Notre Dame offense and then the Notre Dame defense and the matchup against Stanford, kind of what we've seen from Stanford and what's at stake for these sides of the ball too. So we'll do those 2 sections next. But before we do, folks, take a second, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like this show. Actually, that's probably the first thing you do. It's just real quick, bam, you see that thumbs up, hit that thumbs up, give us a like. We would greatly appreciate that. And it helps with the algorithm and all this other kind of stuff that I don't understand, but I just know it helps with the algorithm. And so do that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you've not already done so. And share this show with your friends. And there's obviously two ways to do that. The one is physically shared. Click on it, share it, send it to people. The other one is tell people about what we got going on. Hey, you want really good analysis, honest analysis, talking ball, praise where it's deserved, criticism where it's warranted. You're going to get that at Irish Breakdown. So you definitely want to come check that out. So let those people know that that's what's going on. So Trevor, this is a really interesting matchup in a lot of ways, because in the title the show, I basically said this is a get right opportunity for Notre Dame. And as a team, this is a get right opportunity overall, but as we just spent 30 minutes talking about. But this is especially true on the offensive side of the ball. So there's kind of three parts to the team, right? There's the overall team, and then there's like the defense and what they do, and then there's the offense and what they do. And like the team as a whole has a lot to prove. The defense is just kind of like, guys, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. But the offense is like, you got to figure stuff out, because I wrote this long article on Saturday or Sunday just pointing out like all the chaos that's going to happen in college football. Like, it's impossible. People are like, oh, there's going to be all these one-loss teams. I'm like, guys, it's not possible to have that many one-loss teams because Georgia already lost a game, because Bama already lost a game, because Tennessee already lost a game, because Ole Miss lost a game, and everybody but Georgia lost to a team that nobody really had on the bingo card as losing to that team. Who had them Ole Miss losing at home to Kentucky preseason? Who had Bama losing to Vanderbilt in the preseason? Not a lot of people had Tennessee losing at Arkansas when we saw how good Tennessee was. You might have had it before the season, but once Tennessee came out and was, smacking people, goes on the road, beats Oklahoma, who's like, oh yeah, they're going to beat Arkansas, and they're going to have their quarterback get knocked out of the game, Arkansas, and their backup quarterback is going to lead you down for the game winner, right? I mean, there's so many things that happen. Just like, yeah, I didn't see that one coming. You know what I mean? And if it's not for the ACC being like, hey, guys, we got to do whatever possible to make sure we've got two teams that are eligible for the college football playoff. If that means we got to screw over teams in our conference like Virginia Tech and Cal, we're going to do it with that non-targeting call and linemen blocking at the 1 yard line on a pass thrown from the 5, whatever. But the point is, but that's a Cal team that should not be in competition with Miami, right? Like that's but that's how football works, man. So the point of it all was like, there's so much chaos is going to happen, guys. Notre Dame's got a great path in front of them. ... Big capital B, big capital U, big capital T. But Notre Dame's got to handle their business. And what's going to keep Notre Dame from handling its business is an inconsistent offense that struggles to be balanced enough to make you feel good about them going. And I mean, there's a lot of Notre Dame fans in the chat in the article, which again, I don't understand why everyone's like, some people's first response is to go negative. And like, there's a guy in the chat right now somebody said Leonard Moore played great, and immediately he starts tearing down Leonard Moore and saying, well, Benjamin Morrison played better. And I asked, well, who said otherwise? Well, no one. So your response to someone praising Leonard Moore was to talk about, oh, he gave up this, he gave up that, he's not as good as Benjamin Morrison. Well, who said he was? He's still really good, right? It's like some people go negative. But at the same time, you can say like, yeah, I get it. I don't know that Notre Dame is playing well enough offensively, consistently enough to say I have confidence they're going to go win their next 7 games. And if you do think that they're doing that, that's kind of the fan in us kind of saying that it's more wishful thinking than it is an evaluation of what Notre Dame has done. So this side of the ball has the most to prove. This side of the ball is a situation where if they play better, this team becomes really hard to beat. Because through 5 games, despite the fact I would argue that Notre Dame has already played 2 of their 3 toughest opponents already. Now, that doesn't mean the second half of the schedule is easy by any stretch, because Army's undefeated, Navy's undefeated, Georgia Tech's 4-2 and a quality football team, USC's 4-2 and a quality football team. Both of those games are on the road. Virginia's 4-1. They're coming off of a 10-point win over BC, who was ranked for a time this season. So the schedule's not easy. So even though I would say you've played 2 or 3 of your best opponents, there's a lot teams better than Purdue and Miami and Northern Illinois left on the schedule, right? So if they're going to consistently play to a high level and run the table, the offense has to play better. That's just right there, Trevor, like big picture, this side of the ball coming out of the break has to play a lot better. They don't have to be 40-plus points a game every week. They've got to play better. They've got to be more balanced. That's numero uno when talking about this football team. If Notre Dame's in the playoff at the end of the season, it's because the offense coming out of the bye gets better. If it doesn't, then I have a feeling they're going to stub their toe again against somebody. And that's the first thing that's kind of what's at stake this weekend, or what are we going to learn? We're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame offense because they need to get going.
They need to start taking the necessary steps to become, I don't even want to say an elite offense. This doesn't have to be a 2019 LSU offense that can go and score 49 points a game on any given opponent. Would I be upset if that happened? Obviously, absolutely not. But here's the thing. The thing that I'm going to be looking to see overarching and what's going to make Notre Dame a more balanced football team, and it's all about consistency. In every game that they've played so far this season, Notre Dame has shown flashes, but heavy emphasis on flashes. They've had a really good drive here or a really good quarter here, but it's not enough once you start thinking grand scheme of who Notre Dame has left on their schedule, one, and two, who they're going to inevitably meet in the playoff. So you can't go on a 2.5 quarter scoring drought against teams in the playoffs. That's just not going to happen, right? So Notre Dame has to find a way to become a more balanced offense, to your point. They have to learn how to be a more effective team on both sides. I think it's really easy to say, well, they just have to pass better. Sure, I agree with that 100%. They also need to be more efficient with how they run the ball. A workload is going to have to be taken off of Riley Leonard if he's going to sustain for the rest of the season. They're going to have to get more creative in the run game. So offensive line is going to have to improve. So by no means is Notre Dame's offense a finished product, but what does give me confidence is those flashes are starting to become a little bit more prevalent in each game, hoping that the bye week this week really elevated this team. Some light bulbs got turned on in that offensive room, and they really start humming here over this next 3-game stretch, Brian.
It's going to have to happen. I mean, that's the thing is if they don't, this team isn't going to be who they need to be. Now, listen, coming out and dominating Stanford isn't okay. Like, let's say they come out and let's just say the offense just is rolling in this game, right? Just come out fast. They're going to execute key number one because here's a little preview of Thursday. I'm a spoiler alert. The number one key for the offense is going to be start fast. I know this is going to shock some of you, right? But let's say they come out and they start fast. I mean, it's 28-3 at halftime, and they just bury them in the second half, and it's 56-10. It's like another Stanford, a Purdue type of game. Does that mean problem solved? No, because they scored 59 offensive points against Purdue, right? And they rolled them, and they did all those things. And then the next week they kind of sleepwalk through the Miami game. But it's a step in the right direction. That's the key. It's a step in the right direction because you are playing, let's be honest, right? Let's just keep it real, folks. This is not a very good Stanford defense. And Trevor, we were kind of looking at these numbers before we get started. It's even worse on offense, but these are the stats and the rankings of Stanford coming into this game. They rank 89th in points per game on defense, 72nd in total yards, 102nd in yards per play. They rank 122nd in passing yards allowed, 112th in yards allowed per attempt, 107th in yards per completion, 115th in passer rating, 97th in sacks. They're 91st in third down defense. They're 84th in red zone defense, and they're 75th in turnovers gained. So not only do they get moved on, they don't really force any turnovers. And one of the turnovers they had that they forced against Clemson was just a terrible read by the quarterback. Klubnik threw a go ball with like the corner just like right in the seam, and I'm like, I don't understand why you're throwing that football. But things like that can happen. They happen all at quarterbacks. But when you look at this football team, Trevor, and you say like they compete hard, they play hard, but this is just not a really talented football team. And by the way, they rank 84th in red zone defense. They rank 91st in red zone touchdown defense. So this is one area where they're pretty good is they're actually a pretty decent rushing team. And they rank 12th in the country in fewest rushing yards allowed and 26th in yards allowed per rush. They are only 74th in tackles for loss. So you'd say, well, the rushing overall number of 12th can be skewed because teams throw on. I mean, they're one of the worst teams in college football in throw and pass defense. So maybe it's just because teams don't try to run on them. Well, maybe, but they're 26th in yards allowed per rush, despite ranking 97th in sacks and 74th in tackles for loss, which means they're not creating a lot of negatives. So for them to be 26th in yards allowed per rush, it's actually a pretty quality number. And that's what Notre Dame does best. And so when you look at this matchup, Trevor, and you say, okay, well, Stanford's pretty good at stopping the one thing that Notre Dame does well. To me, Trevor, that's another reason why I do think this game is so important for Notre Dame. Whoops, don't mean to have that up. Is because of that. I don't know why it does that sometimes. It's like I'll open something up and it just immediately goes to my other thing. So I'm trying to pull up the depth chart here for Stanford. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trevor, is like this game is going to be a very telling game for us because, in a lot of ways, but it really starts, in my opinion, with the pass game. And can the Notre Dame pass game get going? I mean, that's really, I mean, just huge. And I would argue this, if you can't get your pass game going in this game, I don't know when it happens. I mean, look, you're going into week 6. You're coming out of a bye. You're rested. You're going to be fresher. Got a chance to shore up some things on your offensive line from a production standpoint. Your receivers have a chance to kind of get in the film room, look at things. Your quarterback. If you can't get right against a team that ranks 122nd in pass defense, 112th in yards allowed per attempt, 107th in yards per completion, 115th in rating, I don't know when you're going to get right. And so that to me is like, if you dominate them through the air, Trevor, it doesn't mean you're going to continue to do it. But if you don't dominate them in the air, and I don't even mean throwing for 350 yards, just be really good at it. You know what I mean? If Riley Leonard goes 12 of 15 for 240 yards and he's out by the middle of the okay, fine. They don't throw for 300 yards. It's not about that. It's about look good throwing football. Protect the quarterback against a team that ranks 97th in sacks, right? Per game sacks. Be able to protect him. Be able to get open against a secondary that's very mediocre. And a scheme that creates a lot of blown coverages if we're talking about it. So this is one of those things, Trevor, where if Notre Dame's offense can't get going in this game, we're just going to have to come out of it and basically say, this is who they are, folks. Just prepare yourself. This is kind of who they are. I don't know that the light's going to go on against some team down the road. This is just kind of who they are.
Yeah, Brian, I think you nailed it. First and foremost, what the stats tell me, one, is yes, on paper, Stanford is a good rush defense, seeing where their ranking is in yards per game. I will say I looked at it to give a little bit of context here. They allowed, I think, 25 yards to Cal Poly on the ground and 26 yards to Syracuse on the ground, which helped those numbers out. They gave up 150 to Clemson and 136 to Virginia Tech. So
let me just give some proper context to that, just because you're spot on. Those numbers are accurate. However, they held Clemson to 150 yards, right? Or they gave up 150 yards against Clemson, 5.0 yards per play. The 2 games before, Clemson rushed for 252 against App State and 269 against NC State, 7.4 and 8.2 per carry. And then last week against Florida State, they ran for 265 and 6.6 yards per carry. So, like, to me, that does kind of impact it a little bit. Like, okay, yeah, 150 is still a decent amount, but Clemson's been running on everybody so far this year. You know what I mean? And that would be kind of my only somewhat pushback. And like you said, they held Virginia Tech to 136, and Virginia Tech is about there. They've been 243, 153, 165 in the 3 games before. So that one's kind of on par. But that Clemson game actually in context was pretty good. But your point about it is still true, however, that they held Cal Poly to 25, they held Syracuse to 26, and they held TCU to only 104. So they have had some very good moments. But last 2 weeks they've played better rushing teams. They've given up more yards, but it's still the most they've given up all year is 150. against Clemson.
100%. I think I appreciate the context added to the context. So it always helps. But when I look at those numbers, first and foremost, is Notre Dame, it would almost be a cardinal sin, no pun intended with Stanford Cardinal here, but it'd almost be a cardinal sin to not take advantage of what those numbers look like for Stanford as a passing defense, right? This game I'm going to look at a lot as a benchmark for Notre Dame's passing offense. Because, Brian, to your point, if they can't pass against this team, it's going to look real fuzzy going into the rest of the year, right? Because now Notre Dame's offense is coming up to a point where they are kind of running out of games to say, oh, well, they're still coming into their own. And I think you and I brought it up in some shows a couple of weeks ago, is at some point that timeline is going to run out. They can't be going into Virginia week saying, hey, if they learn how to pass, this is going to be a dangerous offense. Like,
God, I hope we're not having that conversation, Trevor.
Right. You know, and so it's just, you have to look at this. And I think you said it perfectly. A lot of people are going to get tied up in the stats. And a lot of people go, oh, sure, they opened up the pass game. Riley Leonard went for 225 yards. It's like, well, one, I don't think he has had a game over 200 yards passing.
Hasn't got to 200 yet. In fairness, he had 112 at halftime against Purdue, and he didn't play in the second half.
Right.
But your point stands.
And if Notre Dame isn't able to pass against the Stanford defense, it's just going to be a gloomy outlook for the rest of the season. If Riley Leonard ends the half, because if Notre Dame can come in and beat this Stanford team like we believe that they should, Riley Leonard, I firmly believe, is not going to see a ton of minutes in the second half of this game. I'm not saying that they're going to come in and beat Stanford like what they did to Purdue, but Notre Dame has shown that they have the ability to do that. So going to be interesting to see how the game plan goes out on Saturday, because if Notre Dame has a game plan in the first quarter, in the first half, similar to what they had against Louisville, Notre Dame rattled off 21 straight points on 3 consecutive drives against the Louisville defense, who is better than the Stanford defense. So going to be really interested to see how it all plays out on Saturday.
Trevor, I think your point is to clarify your point. Tell me if you agree with this statement. Notre Dame, with the offense they are going into the next break, what they are from Stanford through Navy will tell us who they're going to be for the remainder of the season. That's how I feel, because we're now game 6. This is the midpoint of the season, and you've had a bye. You've been tested. If there's no growth now, okay, now you're at that point where, okay, over the next 2 weeks, if there's no growth, this is just who you are. And it's up to the Notre Dame coaching staff to figure out ways to get that figured out. And just keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully you get better at it is not the only answer. Now, that's partially true. You do need to get better at things that are there. There are plenty of pass calls that they've made where the receivers are open and the quarterback's looking at it and he gets sacked, or at least he gets hit and he's got to rush a throw, or the quarterback doesn't make the right read, or he makes the right read and he misses. He makes the right read and makes a good throw and it gets dropped. There's just been this comedy of mistakes, this comedy of errors that have kept this pass offense from getting going. But there's still a lot of things from a coaching standpoint that need to get better as well. And if we come out of this bye with this extra time off and they haven't cleaned any of that stuff up, then it's just kind of like, okay, they're not willing to do what it takes to win. Because what I don't want to see them do is just come out of this game and say, okay, we're just going to ground and pound, run for 250 yards, throw for 130, and just no. That's basically limiting yourself. You're playing a team that has one of the worst pass defenses in college football. If you don't even try to throw the ball against them, then you're basically punting on the season. We're just going to be as good as we can be, and we're not a championship team, and we're punting on the season. And I think that's a mistake. That's a big mistake. And I'm not saying they're going to do that. I'm just saying, but like over these next 3 games, we're going to find out, in my opinion, who Notre Dame is on offense. Now, we know what they have been. And what I mean by what they are on offense, it's not that like, okay, forget what we saw the first. No, I'm saying if they are still that team, that's just kind of who they are.
Sure.
We have seen teams through 5. I mean, you go back to Marcus Freeman's first year as defensive coordinator. I thought through the first 5 games, they were very up and down. Looked good at times, against Florida State. And then at times you're like, what are you doing? Looked good at times against Toledo. And then you're just like, why'd you let them back in that game? by game 6, 7, they kind of started to figure things out. I think the second half against Virginia Tech was a little bit weird, but that team started to figure some stuff out. And, they were really good down the stretch again, of November. But you started to see some growth at times into that. And they actually, I think, got good later than what I'm expecting this offense to do. But the point is, you see that from time to time with good teams where you're young on one side of the ball. You have a lot of new starters, new faces, new coordinator, and it might take you a little bit of time to kind of get rolling. But eventually you get there. And that's my point is it doesn't dismiss what we saw the first 5 games. It's just saying, like you said, if there's growth over the next 3 weeks, then I will say that this offense is going to end up being pretty good, or like at least somewhat dangerous, because you're playing the number, Stanford, 122nd in pass defense this week. Next week against Georgia Tech, you're playing a team that's 83rd in pass defense and has given up 10 touchdowns and only picked off 1 pass all season. And then you play a Navy team that ranks 94th in pass defense. So if you can't figure out your pass defense over these next few games, Trevor, then it's just you come to grips with the fact that this is just who Notre Dame is. And that's not, honestly, for me, that's not a place where I want them to be. Virginia, same thing. Florida State's not a very good pass defense. They're 76th. Army ranks 30th. They're actually pretty good. But Virginia ranks, let's see here, they're in the hundreds as well. Virginia ranks 119th in pass defense. And then USC ranks, where are they? They're 13th. So in the next 7 games, you played 2 teams that rank higher than 75th in pass defense. Yeah. There's no excuse not to get that part of your team going. None. And that's what we're gonna find out about this team. Northern Illinois ranks 22nd. Miami, Ohio ranks 56th. Texas A&M ranks 57th. Again, these aren't great numbers. Louisville ranks 53rd. Purdue ranks 46th. All 5 teams that they've played so far rank higher than all but 2 of the final 7 teams that they play. And Stanford is the worst of all of them statistically. So it's kind of make or break time for this offense. It's time to figure it out. And that, to me, is the biggest what's at stake moment for this offense is can you get that part of your game going? Because what I don't want to see is this lazy, we think we can run on them, and so we're just going to that run on them. That's who you are. You need to run the football. I'm not saying come out and empty and throw, but you need to be able to have a legitimate passing offense that's willing to be efficient and explosive. Not just complimentary football, but be aggressive with it. And so those are aspects of it that I want to see is, you've got to get this part of your game going, and it's got to start this week against Stanford.
I think it's fair to say that Notre Dame can take a really big step forward in their passing game against the Stanford defense, and also say that it is not a finished product by any means. I think both can be true, right? So, yeah, Bryan, to the point that you and I are both making is these next 3 games, and it starts with the Stanford game on Saturday, got to see Notre Dame open up the passing game, because if not, they will just be a run-first team, and Riley Leonard will maybe pass for 165 yards a game, which we are starting to get into the latter portion of the season now, where we can start having the discussions around that's just not going to work in the playoffs. That might not work when you go and travel out and play USC in the Coliseum. That's, so there are going to be things that we are all going to be looking for when Notre Dame plays Stanford on Saturday, because they have 3 really good opportunities back to back to back to start to open up that passing game. And some of it is going to be the eye test. I know that there's a lot of like statistic fanatics out there that will only go and look at the stat sheet. It's like, well, Bryan, Trevor, you said that they're going to open up the passing game, and Riley Leonard went 13 of 17 for 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's like, yeah, in a half of football. And that's fantastic. Great. He has yet to eclipse 200 yards in 4 quarters of football. I will be thrilled if he does it in 2 quarters of football, right? So there's steps that they have to take in order to move forward. So we're going to see if they do that. I know there's more facets to it than just can Mike Denbrock scheme up a better play and can Riley Leonard throw the ball better, which I know we're going to dive into throughout this week, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation for us realistically as of right now for the rest of the season until proven otherwise. So excited to get into it with you, Bryan.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And look, I'm not trying to get in this Riley Leonard conversation again, but the reality is it's there's a lot of very, I don't say shallow analysis of the past game, and it's all Riley Leonard's fault. And then Riley Leonard he's not accurate. I'm like, okay, he's only completing 69% of his throws the last 3 games, but whatevs. Let's just say it's not because he's not accurate enough and hang on to 2 really bad throws against Miami Ohio. Just pretend that he, that's just the case. He's not going to figure it out. He's Brandon Wimbush. Like if Brandon Wimbush would have completed 60% of his passes in 2017, Notre Dame doesn't lose a game. Or if he completes 69, like Riley Leonard's currently completing in his last 3 games, and he's 65% on the season. Okay, like that Notre Dame doesn't lose to anybody in 2017. They're not that team. Riley Leonard's got to get better. There's no question he's got to get better. The receivers have to get better. There's no question they have to get better. Now I'm going to have some articles breaking that down, but at the end of the day, this really starts up front. And if you go back and watch the Louisville game, there were plays where they're doing quick game, Trevor. Quick game, catch and throw. And he's catching and he's throwing and he's getting hit as he's throwing the football. And you're watching him throw off of his back foot because, again, the pressure just keeps coming. And it's not 5, 6, 7, 8-man pressures. It's 4 a lot of times, 5. And if the offensive line can't get that figured out, then that ultimately is going to be the thing that dooms this offense. Because if I go out there and let's say Mike Denbrock was like, Driscoll, come to my office and we're going to sit here and we're going to game, and he and I come up with all these great pass plays, right? And in the middle of our conversation, Sean McVay and Matt LaFleur walk in and they help us design some pass plays. And we come up with all these great pass plays, and Riley's executing in practice and the receiver's getting open. And you get to the game and he's getting pressured like he's gotten pressured the last 3 games. It won't matter. It won't matter. And so that's the other thing that they got to figure it out. And there's these excuses about, well, they're down. I get that they're down 3 starters, and 2 of the starters they're down, they replaced with starters from last year. You're not replacing seniors with sophomores. You replace sophomores with seniors, right? And it's their simple things that they're not doing right. They're not doing simple things. If you're a scholarship offensive lineman at Notre Dame, I don't care if you're a freshman through senior, I don't care who you are. If you're a scholarship offensive lineman at Notre Dame, you should be taught how to pick up a twist. You should know how to handle a double-edged pressure in quick game. Take the inside, seal the inside gap first. Quarterback takes outside gap. That's football 101 stuff that they're not handling. So, yes, they're not as talented as they should have been. But I see teams that have players that aren't nearly as good as Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan protect their quarterback better than what Notre Dame has done with those guys in their starting lineup. That's just a fact. And so it's up to Coach Rudolph and to Mike Denbrock to sit there and say, hey, listen, y'all need to figure this out. We need to figure this out. Let's get this coached up right. Because, look, Anthony Knapp's going to lose some reps. He's a freaking true freshman who's not 300 pounds. He's going to get beat sometimes. You can't compound that with protection mistakes. That's my thing. Look, Rocco Spindler's going to get beat a couple times. Pat Coogan's going to get beat a couple times. That's part of football. And if one guy's getting beat like that, but he's still competing, Riley Leonard goes off because that's when he takes off scrambling. When Rocco gets beat and Rocco just rides the guy, Riley sidesteps and either throws it or takes off running. And it's a big play. What can't and we saw this against Miami, Ohio, and it get called for holding, and he shouldn't have held, but because he didn't need to hold. But it's the play where Sam Pendleton just gets beat around the outside. And, he holds the guy. I didn't think it was the holding was early in the play. He didn't hold him when he went, and then Riley makes the guy miss, and everybody's got a body on the body. He takes off running, picks up almost the first down. If you get beat and you got a body on the body, Riley can do something with that. What you can't have is run-throughs because you didn't block the twisting defensive end who's now coming up the middle with a free run at the quarterback. That's harder to stop. What you can't do as a quarterback is when I'm throwing catch and throw and an inside pressure runner blitzer gets let through, and as I'm here, I'm getting drilled. and I can't get the ball out to Bo Collins on a quick out throw. Like, that has to get cleaned up. 100%. If that is all that changes, this pass offense will be better, without question. Now, will it be good enough to compete in the play? No, there's other parts that have to get better. Like, it's not only on the O-line. The receivers got to play better. Riley Leonard's got to play better. He's progressing in the offense. He's going through his reads better. Still work to be done, right? But that's been the kind of the great – it's like it's the kryptonite to all those other improvements from happening. And that, to me, is the thing I hope that they spent the most time working on, is just throwing a bunch of stuff, because Stanford's going to know, hey, we can't sit back here and just play base defense against Notre Dame. We can't. We're going to have to attack and try to create some negatives and go at them that way. And if they can pick it up, I think this offense goes off. If Riley's struggling to get into any kind of rhythm because of the way that the pressure's happening, then this is going to be another unnecessarily competitive game. It's as simple as that. And for a beat-up football team, it would be great to have a bye and then a game where you maybe only play half the game, and then 2 games that are going to be competitive, and then another bye. All of a sudden, you're going to that 4-game November stretch pretty fresh. And hopefully they can kind of get to that point in time. So, those are all aspects of it, Trevor, where if they can protect up front, this offense is going to be better in the pass game. And then if they can make the improvements beyond that, which we've talked about, but that's the biggest thing is you're playing a defense, Trevor, that ranks 97th in the country in sacks.
Yep.
This is not a team that's good at putting pressure on the quarterback. So it's even more problematic if this is a week where you're giving up pressures. Very problematic for me.
Well, and what they're doing right now as an offense to combat, I don't want to say an ineffective pass protection scheme, but I think subpar is a pretty accurate description. What they're doing right now to combat that is not a sustainable form of football to get you continuous wins and go on a win streak and become the offense that you can be with the skill that you have at certain positions. The rollouts and the sprint outs are good early, but that can't be your entire passing scheme. Brian, to your point, there were too many free rushers on Saturday. As a quarterback, you played the position, I played the position. Pressure up the middle is the hardest to escape. I mean, you are left with so many limited options, and
especially free runners, Trevor.
Yes,
especially free runners. Because so let me add this real quick. Here's why I want to explain to people why that is. If a guy's coming at me unblocked, I have to make him miss. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. If I'm Riley Leonard, if a guy's being blocked, if Rocco Spindler just gets beat in the A gap, but he's got a body and he's riding and he's trying, I know. He's here, defender's there. I'm stepping to my right, and I'm either climbing the pocket, or I'm sliding right, throwing, or I'm sliding right, taking off. I can move around your block. I see the leverage you have as a blocker, and I now move off of that leverage. If Anthony Knapp is getting beat around the outside, but he's still got a hand on a guy, I just know I need to climb the pocket and throw the football. I'm good there. If he gets beat inside a gap, but he still has a body on him, I can slide left and either take off running or reset my feet and throw the football. If a guy's coming at me as a free runner, it's a lot harder for me to know where to go. It just is. And oftentimes, even if I make that guy miss, a lot of times the offensive lineman that's getting beat then runs into you because he's in chase mode, right? So that's what I'm saying is, like, to your point, it's the free runners. That's the thing, is like the free runners has got to stop with this. And especially, Trevor, to your point, when they're coming up the middle. It's a problem. I just wanted to add, please continue from where you were, but I just wanted to make sure people understood that part of it and why that is harder for a quarterback.
Yeah. Well, and Riley has shown that he can make plays if there's still a guy with a hand on a body. I mean, in the first quarter, they had almost a very similar situation to what you were describing, and he got pressure off the left side. Knapp still had a body on a body. Riley Leonard was able to climb the pocket, roll out left, reset his feet, finds Jaden Greathouse on the sideline down the field for a first down. So Leonard is able to make plays. If the pocket protection is not picture perfect, he's doing a better job so far as the year progresses of keeping his eyes down the field when he leaves the pocket. But you have to eliminate the free rushers. one of the biggest gripes that people have had is the lack of play action, which I am one of those people, was before I sat down and started really digging deep into like why. Because there's no way that Mike Denbrock is like, we're just not going to use it. I just don't believe that. And play action is a long developing play. If Riley Leonard can't just in the shotgun, clap, catch, snap, plant his feet, and go without getting hit, play action is not working. You're not going to have the time. Riley Leonard wouldn't even have the time to get the ball out of the gut of the running back before he's getting hit, realistically. So for the people out there, and I was one of those people that were like, well, there's no play action, and Notre Dame's a run-heavy team. Why are you not using play action? Those things are true. But in order to be able to run play action successfully, you need more than a half a second to throw the football. So the key to the passing game, one of the keys to the passing game being opened up, starts up front. It has to. And that's going to slow down Riley Leonard's read progression, not slow it down to where he can't get through it, but slow it down enough to where he's not rushing his reads. Plays can be developed farther down the field, which then you have to start, you factor in Bo Collins across the middle of the field. Chris Mitchell, we've seen across the middle of the field on deep dig routes before. Mitchell Evans, we've seen across the field. So going to be interested to see how the offensive line adjusts. Doesn't look like there's been a change in the starting lineup. I know there was some speculation about that on the boards and on different shows that we've had throughout the last couple of weeks.
It's not speculation as much as wishful thinking.
Sure.
Hoping that maybe something would be done personnel-wise. But, yeah, at least from a depth chart standpoint, I always tell people don't put too much into a depth chart. But at least from a depth point standpoint, it doesn't look like they're going to make any personnel changes.
Yep, agreed. But it starts up front. And Riley Leonard needs better pass protection if this passing game is going to open up, and that's where it starts for sure.
So can we talk about you mentioned the lack of drop back throwing? Okay, so I want to put some data to what you said, because you said that Mike Denbrock doesn't sit there and say like, hey, we don't need to. What was it you said? He doesn't say what?
Right. Mike Denbrock's not sitting in the film room saying we're just not going to run play action. Right.
So let me tell you what the looking at this is according to Pro Football Focus. They break down pass plays by it's basically play action, no play action, screen, no screen, that type of thing. In 2021, Mike Denbrock, starting quarterback, averaged 8 play action passes a game. In 2021, he averaged 7 play action passes a game. This is with a team that ran the football a decent amount. In 2022 at LSU, they averaged 5.1 dropbacks per game. That rose to 5.8 last year, despite having a team that didn't really have a great running game from the running backs. They had a great running game from the quarterback, but not the running backs. So far this season, Notre Dame is averaging 3.2 dropbacks per game with Riley Leonard. Why? It's because of what you said, Trevor. It's because play action requires a level of protection that they're not giving. And it's not just the line. The tight ends have been awful in pass pro and play action as well. And so that's a big part of that is like Jared Parker's decision not to run play action last year against Clemson was just like one of the weirdest things I've ever heard in my life. Well, they're playing a lot of man coverage. What? Like I've been around football a long time. I've designed and called several play action passes against man coverage. I've never been in they're playing man, so you can't run play action. I've heard, hey, we don't want to run that concept because of this coverage. That's fine, but we can't do play action. I was like, what the heck is that all about? So the reason is you're not doing a good enough job protecting the quarterback. It's simple as that. And so that's why I say a lot of things open up if the pass protection gets better. There's things you can't call as a coach that because of the play action. Like, hey, I love double post, but if I can't protect the quarterback and if I'm getting pressure up the middle, I can't call double posts because if my quarterback is hit, ball's floating up in the middle of the air, right down the middle of the field, it's picked off. You want to know why Notre Dame's pass game is almost exclusively to the perimeter? It's because if there's pressure, I'm not going to get damaged as much. I got to throw the ball outside. It's hard to throw the ball over the middle of the field when you're getting pressure, especially pressure up the middle, Trevor, because A, I can't step into the throw that way. And B, if I get hit when the ball's like the quick game throw to Bo Collins, as an out cut. He gets hit, ball's behind him, it falls incomplete. Try doing that on an in cut, and all of a sudden the ball floats up in the air, and a D tackle picks it off, or a linebacker picks it off, or it sails the intended target, and it gets intercepted, and then it's like, oh, Riley Leonard sucks. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of guys suck when they're getting drilled in the face as they're trying to throw the football, right? That's the key. If that gets better, everything else gets better, and you start seeing some things adjust. That's the key. That's why it's so important. And again, if they think Anthony Knapp's the best left tackle, okay, let's roll. Let's hope that you guys are right. Now get him ready. I don't want to hear stuff about, well, Rocco. Then don't put him in those one-on-one situations against better athletes. Set your protection to where you're doing different things. That's my thing, is fix the protection, fix the scheme, make sure guys know what they're doing. If that's all that they improve, the pass game will improve. Is it going to look like 2019 LSU? No. It'll look like a quarter's worth of 2019 LSU maybe, but it's about efficiency and explosiveness. I don't care if they only throw the ball 18 times a game or 35 times a game. Be efficient and explosive. And so far this season in the pass game, they've been neither of those things. They're neither efficient nor explosive. And that just can't continue. The 7 teams you play, if your defense has one bad day and you keep playing on offense the way you have, you're going to get beat again. That's it. And here's the thing. If the pass protect for all the anti-Riley Leonard people, here's my point to you. If Riley Leonard can't get comfortable in the pocket, none of the other quarterbacks are going to be comfortable in the pocket. He saved you several sacks so far this season. If they can clean up the pass pro and Riley Leonard then doesn't improve, then you can sit down as a coaching staff and say, hey, listen, maybe do we need to make a change? So even if you're a Riley ain't the guy person, okay, whatever. I'm not going to, my stance. Let's see, I still think he's the best guy right now, for now. But if a lot of it, just because the O-line, if the O-line the next 3 games is lighting the world on fire, the pass pro's gotten way better, they're protecting the quarterback, and Riley doesn't improve, then you can start having a conversation of, okay, should we put Steve in the game? Should we put Kenny in the game? Should we put CJ in the game? Because then you say, okay, I at least am comfortable enough that the pass protection can give them enough time to then improve the production in the pass game if you don't think Riley can do it, right? That's fair. So if it does get better and he doesn't get better, then we'd have that conversation. But right now, with the way the protection is, even if you wanted to bench Riley Leonard, you'd be a fool to do so. I pointed out, Riley Leonard's played what? He's played, 4 full games, 16 quarters. He's basically played 18 quarters of football this year. He's been sacked twice. Steve Angeli's played 3 quarters of football this year. He's been sacked 3 times. They're different players. Kenny Minchie would probably get sacked a couple times too. He's a little bit more of a runner. He's a little bit more mobile than Steve, but Steve Angeli's not a bad athlete. He's just a pocket passer. And same with CJ Carr. They may escape a couple, but they're still going to get sacked more. And this offense can't afford to play behind the chains.
100%.
And so it's just everything hinges around this. Pass pro, O-line, you've got to get going. I think if they can do that, Trevor, I'm going to feel a lot better about this offense coming. It's not going to be a light the world on fire, score 45 points a game. But with this defense, it doesn't have to be. That's the point. It doesn't have to be. If they're scoring legitimately 28 points, and if you were to tell me Notre Dame's going to score 28, just 28 points in their next 7 games, I'll probably say, okay, I think they'll probably go undefeated. I mean, if they only scored 25 points in the first 5 games, they'd be undefeated. If they scored just 25 points in every single game, 25 in the opener, 25. Well, they won a game already scoring 23. Mm-hmm. They won another game scoring 28 where they won by 25. They held another opponent to 3 points. I mean, they literally could have beat 2 opponents this year by scoring 6 points. Right? They needed 17 against Northern Illinois. That's it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They only needed 25 against Louisville to win that game, right? So you don't have to be a 40-point per game score. I've given up on them being what I thought they could be coming in the season. They're not going to be that team because of there's a lot of reasons why, but they're just not going to be that team. But you don't have to be. You just got to be better than what you are now, more efficient and be able to create some explosive with who you are now. And that's going to be the key. And if they can't do it this weekend, Trevor, then I just don't know when that happens. That's the reality of it. Last thing on that is, if all the other parts around him improve, they're going to need Riley Leonard to get more comfortable sitting in the pocket and making plays.
Yep.
In my opinion. So he can't, yes, you got to get all that, but he's going to have to eventually, okay, if they give you the time, if the receivers do their job, now it's up to you to get the ball where it needs to go to. And at times he's done that. At times he hasn't, right? I mean, some of the mistakes he's made are not on the offensive line, right? That's on him. So he's going to have to continue to clean that stuff up as well. So we'll see if they're able to do that, but that's kind of where they are their offense. Because if they do that, I have no doubt that Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are going to keep balling. And I like to convince myself that Mitchell Evans is eventually going to figure it out, and get going. Receivers are going to hopefully come out of this reinvigorated, all those things you hope. Now it's up to the trigger man to get the ball where it needs to go to. And if Riley Leonard plays well, this team is in the throwing game. This team will be impossible to beat in the next seven games, because if he's throwing well, that means all those other things are going. Riley can't throw well if the O-line's not playing better, if the receivers aren't doing their job. You get what I'm saying? Like, if Riley Leonard is a more effective passer the next 7 games and all that goes with that, I don't know that this team is going to lose another regular season game. They may not be good enough to beat Texas and Ohio State, without a much bigger jump, but at least the next 7 games, they're going to be tough to beat, in my opinion.
100%.
Go.
Riley Leonard doesn't have to be a guy week over week where every throw is fitting it into the tightest possible window in coverage and putting 42-yard throws on the money every single time. He just has to be a consistent facilitator of the football. He just needs to execute the plays when they are given to him, because he has shown that he is inconsistent with the layups, right? He has shown that he can push the ball down the field, and then he's also shown spurts where he can't. So for Riley, him taking that next step is just that level of consistency of when he does get the time and when he does get the pass protection and sees an open receiver. 1, he's willing to pull the trigger on it. And 2, just execute. Just get the ball where it needs to go. Don't drill it into the dirt. Don't sail it 5 yards over a receiver's head. So all of those combined. But again, like we've said, Riley Leonard doesn't have to go out and be Joe Burrow and be Baker Mayfield. But if those things can start to get cleaned up, Notre Dame's going to be a really hard offense to stop.
So, Trevor, that's going to do it for our offensive breakdown for this part of it. We're going to get into the defense next, because that's a little bit of a different conversation, and it's going to be very fascinating to dive into that. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. You know what? Actually, time out a second. We're not doing a mailbag, but I do think there was a question that was brought up that we're saying these things about get better, get better, get better. And Michael Johnson asked a question. He says, if the O-line and tight ends play better this weekend, what would that look like? I actually think that's a pretty good question to address before we move on to the defense, Trevor. And I'll tell you what it's like for me. What it comes down to is, in early downs, Riley Leonard's able to get through his drop and be able to throw in rhythm. The O-line playing better doesn't mean Riley sits there, looks right, looks left, comes back to the right, and he's able to throw the ball. Or he looks right, looks left, nothing's open. Then he's got to scramble like, oh, freaking O-line, come on. No, that's on you as a skill player. Either guys weren't getting open or you didn't pull the trigger and make the right read, right? So it's number one, it starts with that. He's able to get to his drops, gather, whether it's hit and throw quick game or gather, step, throw down the field, get his depth, allow the deeper routes to kind of get open, get the ball out into those spaces, those type of things where he's able to get into a rhythm throwing the football. That's number one. For Riley, it then comes down to, if he's playing better, he's making better decisions pre-snap, number one, and then going through his progressions like he did against Miami. If Riley Leonard gets time to throw and mentally plays the way he did against Miami, this offense will be scary good. Scary good. Now, they weren't against Miami for a whole lot of reasons, right? But you had drops, you had different things that went on. If that part of the game matches the other parts, then you're going to be pretty good. And then do it consistently. So I thought, and when I say mental, I mean making your reads. Now, there were still times where I need to see him not miss easy throws. Don't miss the layups, as people like to say.
Right.
If he doesn't do that, we're having a different conversation, I believe, about his throwing ability, because we'd have seen he did some pretty good things against Purdue. He hit some deep shots against Miami. If you take away those just bad misses early in the game and a couple of again, pre-snap reads where, look, you got to go with that read and get the ball out. It's not about, hey, man, I need you to hit 37 bombs. It's when that 5-yard speed out is wide open, you got to see it and hit it and let that guy go to work. And then the final piece is this Mike Denbrock shows enough confidence in his line and his quarterback to then dial up some shots. I'm watching every team in college football this weekend just throw go balls and give their guys chances to make plays. And I'm like, you're telling me that Notre Dame doesn't have good enough receivers to do, like, no one on this roster is good enough to do things that I see teams like Arkansas and SMU and I mean, teams that are just like not even great teams making plays. And I'm like, no, none of Notre Dame's guys can do that. Really? None of them. So there's a clear lack of confidence in the pass game from not just the players, but also the coaches. And so I think it'd be, if there's confidence in the O-line, there's confidence in Riley being able to go through his progressions, then you're going to see a more aggressive pass attack that's geared towards, let's design guys open for big play opportunities, where right now Mike Denbrock's entire game plan is designed on getting guys free in the quick game to move the chains. That's the extent of it. We've seen a couple design big plays. We saw the one against Louisville late in the game, right, that put that game away on the slot fade, where they did the motion and the pivot route, and then that got the coverage down and they run it behind it. Some things like that. And the reason we don't see Mike Denbrock do a lot of that, which he did a lot of at Cincinnati, he did a lot of that at LSU, it's because he doesn't think he can protect his quarterback. And he's not, and I don't know that he's confident that the quarterback will get the ball out on time. So the offensive pass game getting going is, protection-wise, you're good. Riley's going through his progressions relatively well, and Mike Denbrock has enough confidence in his entire unit to say, okay, let's be more aggressive. And so you want to talk about what it would look like. It's a 65 to 68% completion percentage. That also includes 4 or 5 aggressive throws down the field. Now, that's not go ball. It can be go balls. It can be backside digs. It can be corner routes, just more aggressive throwing the ball down the field in different ways. Maybe some deep climb routes where you're trying to clear out with your backside and then bring that guy over top of the linebackers, whatever. Those are more aggressive shots that you can't run if you don't think you can have more than 2 seconds to throw the football. You can't call those plays. And the other part of it is, if they fix those things, Riley's got to show the confidence in the line as well. He's got to have more confidence that the line's going to give him time if they do it, and not rush and still think you're having those struggles. And so you'll see a team that's 65 to 68% completions, and you're going to see that yards per attempt go from like 5 to 6, which what it is now, to more close to 8 to 9 yards per attempt. That's when this offense has figured out the pass game. And I don't know, that may be 195 yards passing. It may be 295 yards passing. It may be 395 yards passing. But it's not so much about the total yards for me. It's about the aggressiveness and the ability to kind of create a couple. They don't need to make 5, 6 big passing plays a game. If they hit 2 or 3, defenses are like, okay, now what do we do?
Right.
Because they're hitting bombs, and now we're trying to stop the run game, and they're hitting bombs over. Like I've said this, when Brandon Wimbush threw that post route over the top of the head of USC on that first touchdown drive, and then the very next drive comes down and throws an outside go ball back shoulder to Kevin Stepherson, USC quit. They said, how the heck are we going to beat this team when they're throwing the ball down the field? Like, the whole thing we thought is like, we don't have to worry about the pass game. We just got to stop the run game. And they turned everything into stopping the run game. And Notre Dame hit them with those 2 balls over the top, and you're just like, they ran a reverse to Kevin Stepherson in that game too, if you remember correctly. And all of a sudden, USC's like, okay, we put all of our resources into stopping the run, and they're throwing the ball over our head for big plays. They quit. How do you defend that team? Miami dared them and said, hey, we're going to dare you to throw the ball downfield. And Brandon misses Equanimous on that post route, falls incomplete. Miami said, see, he can't throw the ball downfield on us. So then they just kept putting all their resources stopping the run, and Notre Dame never made them pay for it. You don't have to do it a whole lot. You hit a couple big ones early, and all of a sudden that team's like, oh, God, it's going to be a long day. because this team that we didn't think could throw and is built on running the ball is now throwing the ball over our head for big plays. I don't know what the answer is now. That's what it looks like. So that's, Michael, that's a great conversation. And you know what? Honestly, we should have brought that up. Michael's numbers, he said 15 to 25 for 250, 3 touchdowns. I mean, if Riley Leonard does that in this game, I'll be happy. Yeah. I'm not going to be like, hey, let's get our national championship rings fitted, because this is a bad pass defense. Yeah. But it would be a good sign. And now if you can build on that against Georgia Tech and Navy, now you might feel like, okay, it's there. But it's at least a step in the right direction. That's what we said is you have to look at it and say, okay, how – like they just got to take that step. They got to take that step. Mm-hmm. And if they can do that, then I think they're going to be pretty dangerous, Trevor. So Michael, that's a great question. And honestly, that's my fault. We should have probably talked about that. Should have been part of the conversation, Michael. So appreciate you saying that. But yeah, for me, Trevor, that's what it looks like. And I kept seeing you shake your head yes. So I feel like we're on the same page. Like, it's not so much about throwing for 350 yards. It's about just how the operation of what it looks like and how it's going, and the protection and the reads. And then that allows Mike Denbrock to be more aggressive with what he's calling.
Yeah, 100%. I don't have much more to add. The only thing that I will say is improved offensive line and tight end play. Notre Dame's percentage of converting third downs goes up significantly. Right now, they're the 103rd ranked team in the country in converting third downs at 35%. You start getting tight ends involved. You get the offensive line with better pass protection, tight ends with better pass protection, get them more involved in the passing game. I think that number starts to increase significantly.
Now we're going to transition over to the defense, Trevor. So, folks, hit that like button on your way before we get over there, and hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And I've yet to tell you guys to do this, but today, at some point in time during the show or after the show, come join us over on the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Going to have a lot of fun conversation over there. A lot of good stuff we're discussing over there. And it's been a lot more good back and forth this last week. I think the bye week was cathartic for a lot of people, and you're watching Vanderbilt get beating Bama, and you're like, yeah, Vanderbilt's probably better than Northern Illinois, but it's like, okay, but you know what? This stuff crazy. It doesn't make the Northern Illinois game better, but you realize, like, hey, this is a crazy sport we watch, and Notre Dame's got a chance to go make some noise now if they can fix their own issues. So it's a lot more healthy conversation in that regard. So it's gonna be fun. So check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trevor, the last part of today's show is going to focus on the defense. And this is going to be a little bit of a quicker conversation, because in a lot of ways, this is going to be more focused on just Stanford, because except for one thing. And this is the notes I sent you before, I'm going to move the bottom two up to the top. And we're going to get into the specific Stanford matchup. But the big thing for me is this is the first game that we're really going to see kind of this new look defensive line that's had a week to prepare for what it's going to be without Botelho, without Boubacar Traore. Okay, what's it going to be? And at the end of the day, the defensive line has suffered some blows, but there's still a lot of talent up there, especially relative to who they're going to be playing. You're going to need some guys to step up, Trevor. This is a game where I'm very curious to see how this defense performs, because, again, you're playing an offense. Let's pull this up that we're looking at earlier. At least the defense does something redeeming. The highest statistical ranking that the Stanford offense has is 71st in rushing. Then they're 79th in yards per rush. After that, the next thing they're highest in is third down offense at 90th.
Yep.
And they rank outside the top 100 in points, yards per play, yards per game total, tackle. They're almost last in the country in tackles for loss allowed. They rank 113th in sacks allowed. They're outside the top 100 in passing yards allowed, pass yards allowed per completion, passing yards per attempt, efficiency rating on offense. I'm sorry. These are offensive numbers. So it's passing yards per attempt, passing yards per completion, sacks allowed, third down offense. They're 121st in red zone offense. They're 98th with 9 turnovers in 6 games. Or excuse me, they're 2-4, correct? They only played 5 games so far, so they're 2-3. In 5 games, they've turned the ball over 9 times. This is a really bad offense, And depending on whether or not Ashton Daniels plays, which we'll get into, it makes it even worse, which is why if Ashton Daniels plays, the Virginia Tech game has no meaning to this conversation at all. Because you take Ashton Daniels off that offense, and it's not even that he's that good. It's just the rest of their quarterback room is awful, right? This is not a very good offense. So for the Notre Dame defense, it's number one. It's about come out focused and playing with fire. Like, what's your standard? What is your want to? What is your why? Why am I coming out here and playing today? Because we are trying to prove to everyone in college football that we are the best defense in college football. The best defense in college football. I don't care who's on the other side of the field. We're going to show that we're the best defense in college football. That's the mindset that has to be there. Within that, this defensive line is going to be key to that, because you now have lost what I would say is your two best defensive linemen through the first 6 games, in Jordan Patojo and Boubacar Traore. So my question is, how does this defense create – they weren't very good at creating pressures and disruptions, and you've now lost your two best guys at that on the edge. How does this defensive line step up? And then the other question, Trevor, and this is the big one for me, who steps up? Does Howard Cross finally become what he's supposed to be? Does Riley Mills, does RJ Oben show up for the 2024 season? Does the light go on for Bryce Young? Can Junior Chilamaka keep doing he's doing? Does Josh Burnham start making an impact? Is it Logan Thomas? Is it Jason Onye? Is it, who's it going to be? And ideally, hopefully it's a few. It's not just one. But there's still enough talent for this D-line to still be pretty good, especially against a team like Stanford. And so we're going to find out this weekend against Stanford, Trevor, whether or not this defensive line has kind of got their heads on straight and are saying, like, hey, guys, this is on – how good we're going to be the rest of the year is on us. Right? Linebackers are playing great. We got the best secondary in college football. If we're not the best defense in football, it's on us. That's the mindset. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but that's the mindset they got to have, because I do think this Notre Dame defense – I mean, look at they're ranked first, second, third, or fourth, and every metric I've been able to find that looks at context, efficiency, things like that, where you take the competition into consideration – they're a top 4 defense, and I think 1 or 2 of those services rank them number 1 right now in defense. And that's with the D-line just kind of being okay. If this D-line can take that next step and kind of get it going, just if Riley and Howard just get back to being what they were last year, not even just what they were last year. If RJ Oben gets back to just being what he was the last 3 years at Duke, forget improvement, just be what you were. Then it comes down on the young guys and what they're able to prove. But that's the big key for me, is if this defense is going to truly become a lockdown, dominant, elite defense, not just an elite pass defense. Because right now I think a lot of this is geared towards their elite pass defense and a sort of a solid run defense. If the D-line plays better, the run defense gets better. I don't care if Al Golden calls games the exact same way. To me, it's as simple as that, Trevor. It comes down to that. Who steps up?
It's going to show what kind of mindset, and it's almost going to kind of confirm what we believe Al Golden's mentality is with this defense. If there's anything that I know about Al Golden, especially from what I've watched from him, especially last year, is I could see this defense coming out and just absolutely punishing Stanford because they gave up 24 points to Louisville in their last game. Now, 14 of those points came on a short field, but the standard of Notre Dame's defense is you don't allow touchdowns on those drives, right? So to your point about who's going to step up, the opportunity is served on a silver platter to RJ Oben, to Bryce Young, to the returning veterans in Howard Cross and Riley Mills, to Junior Tuihalamaka, to Josh Burnham, who's going to get his opportunity, to Logan Thomas. So there's a lot of players that have the opportunity to do it. Now, there's obviously question marks around everybody that I just listed. Is Josh Burnham going to be able to come back and play post the injury? Are Howard Cross and Riley Mills going to be able to step up and be the players that we thought they were going to be preseason? Is Bryce Young going to perform to that 5-star caliber that we know? He's taken the steps to do it, but is he then going to get over that hump to start becoming an elite factor of this defense? So the opportunity's there, and similar to the conversations that we're having on the offensive side, these next 3 games are going to be telling to see who is going to be that guy that steps up on the defensive line. because you have it in the secondary. You have case could be made, multiple people in the secondary, Brian, to your point. So if the defensive line can get figured out, it's no longer going to be a conversation of does Notre Dame have a top pass defense, but it'll go to does Notre Dame have an elite defense as a whole. So really excited to see what these next 3 games are going to look like, specifically on the front 4.
It's kind of funny, Trevor, because coming into the season, our question was, can Notre Dame's secondary be as good as it was last year? Just as good. And the hope was that it could be just as good. Now, there's some context that needs to be had about the opposition. But so far this season, the Notre Dame secondary has been even better than it was last year. And it's been more disruptive. It's creating more breakups, more interceptions. And it's doing so with a pass rush that hasn't been as good as the one they had last year. I mean, their ability to cover has been really impressive, really impressive. And the manner in which they're just completely shutting teams down, throwing the football. I mean, gave up 264 yards to Louisville. They had 6.4 yards per attempt. They needed 41 attempts to get to that 264, and a chunk of that number was done on that final scoring drive and final drive where Notre Dame was kind of playing off and giving them certain things in the pass game because they were going to make them go on a drive, which again I hate. I don't like it, but it's football. It is what it is, But they 6.4 yards per attempt. They didn't play great against SMU this past weekend, but they had 9.4 yards per attempt against SMU on Saturday. They had 14.2 against Georgia Tech. Notre Dame held them to 6.4. Their lowest passer rating in a game outside of the Notre Dame game was 154.97. Notre Dame held them to 131.90. The SMU game was the lowest completion percentage of the season so far at 62.9. Notre Dame held them to 58.5. So, I mean, you look at it, it's not just that they handled themselves. I mean, they kept that pass game in check. And they've kind of done that every week. Now, the caveat is they haven't played anyone outside of Louisville that's really good at throwing the football. Miami's not bad for that level. And, A&M's not a great pass offense. But, I mean, they showed this. Like, A&M in the 5 games that they've won is averaged 7.8, 10.5, 6.0, 7.4, and 12.5 in yards per attempt. They've had a minimum of 163 yards passing in every game. They've had worst completion percentage was against Arkansas at 50. Then it's 55.2. They completed 81.2% of their throws on Saturday. Against Notre Dame, they were at 40% completion percentage. They had 100 passing yards on 30 attempts. So, like, people keep saying this, like, well, A&M is so much better now. I mean, no more than most other teams develop in 5-6 games, right? But guys, they went out and scored 52 points against McNeese State, and then scored 33 against Florida and called off the dogs against Florida in their next game. And that was with their backup quarterback. Well, Connor Wegman's so much better. Yeah, he's better now because he doesn't play Notre Dame's defense. Does Connor Wegman look like he looked on Saturday if he's playing the Notre Dame defense? No, he doesn't. This is the thing, is like, it's not a coincidence that these quarterbacks always have like their quote unquote worst games when they play Notre Dame. I mean, it's not a coincidence. Oh man, Miami of Ohio, they got beat by Toledo this weekend. They're not very good. No, they're not very good. And they got beat by Cincinnati and Northwestern. They're not very good. No, they're not very good. They passed for 296 yards against Toledo, 339 yards against Cincinnati, and 227 yards against Northwestern. They passed for 119 against Notre Dame. So, like, the numbers aren't even anywhere close to what they're doing against other teams. So, yes, they're not playing great pass offenses, but they're absolutely dominating inferior pass offenses. Like, that has been incredibly impressive with this secondary. And they did it against Louisville without their starting field cornerback, who's been, I would argue, every bit as good as Benjamin Morrison. Maybe you could say Benjamin's been slightly better. Some people would argue Christian's been slightly better. The fact is they've both been phenomenal.
Yep.
So far this season. And you played that whole game without him, and you replaced him with a freshman, and your junior backup cornerback that was your rotation guy that played in all those other games quit the team the week before. And you still went out and did what you did against Louisville. This is an elite secondary. It's absolutely an elite secondary. But an elite secondary playing against Texas and Ohio State and those type of teams is going to give up plays if you can't rush the quarterback. And that's the big key for me. That's the one thing that I look at this defense and say in the second half of the season, Trevor, that I need to see from this defense is they do so many things so well, but they're not disruptive enough when it comes to the things that you do with your front seven. They're incredibly disruptive in the pass game from a breakups and interceptions. You pointed that out the other day, Trevor. They're on pace to blow away their numbers from last year, blow away those numbers. But Notre Dame right now ranks 106th in tackles for loss, and they rank 37th in sacks. That has to change, and it has to change without your two most disruptive edge players. That's the life. So you can either say, well, tough break, it is what it is, we're just going to pack it in and build for 2025, or you say, hey, listen, don't care. You're replacing, like, think about it. You're replacing Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patelho in the lineup with guys like Josh Burnham and Bryce Young, Junior Tilamaka, Logan Thomas. These are talented football players. They're a little younger, some of them, but they're talented football players, Trevor. And you still have your two dudes at defensive tackle. And you're going to be getting Gabriel Rubio back soon. So who's going to step up with those guys out? When Patelho stepped up, went out, who's going to step up? Boubacar was like, I got you, coach. I'm going to step up. And he dominated the next two games. And he got hurt. Okay, now Boubacar's down. Who's going to step up? Right? Hopefully it's a unit approach, but somebody's going to have to step up and shut it down. And that's really the only question I have about this defense in the second half of the year, Trevor, because that is going to impact. We could talk run defense has got to get better. We could talk about they got to be more disruptive, and all, but that all comes down to the D-line. The D-line playing better. That's what that at the end of the day, that's it. Al Washington's unit, to me, is going to determine whether this is an outstanding top 5 to 10 defense, or if this is a truly, hey, we can win a championship because of this defense. That's what's going to be determined. And man, I'm looking forward to seeing it, because that's that. But again, that's the only really the question. As long as they just keep doing what you're doing, that's the only thing that to me that could determine could really knock this team off from where they are is that right there. That's it.
Similar to how we talked about Notre Dame's offense taking advantage of Stanford's really bad pass defense, is that going to right the ship and say that Notre Dame is now ready to compete with Ohio State? No, I'm not saying that in the slightest, but they have the chance to take the step in the right direction, and they have the same opportunity to do that against Stanford. They're tied 113th in the country in sacks allowed. They've allowed 15 sacks through 5 games. And it's one of those where we can look at and say after the game, if Notre Dame's not able to get after the quarterback against this team, no matter who's lining up at Viper, no matter who's lining up at D end, and no matter who's in the rotation to defensive tackle, that's going to be where, similar to the offensive side, we just look back and say, I guess Notre Dame's just not going to be able to get after the quarterback this year, right? So it's going to be a lot of opportunity. And I think that sums up the defensive portion pretty well, is there's opportunity all around, right? Like, this isn't a question of, well, if Notre Dame's defense doesn't bring their A game, Stanford's throwing up 30. It's not that at all. But it's about taking the necessary right steps, loaded with opportunity. It starts at the defensive line. And it's going to be even more paramount for a head coach that claims that this is an offensive and defensive line driven team. Now you have a much bigger opportunity to go out and prove, hey, we are still a trenches driven program, and we're starting to show it.
I'm going to make a statement, and you tell me if you agree or disagree with it. Okay? And I want people in the chat to tell me the same thing. Marcus Freeman has a lot of sayings. One of those is we're going to be a offensive and defensive line driven program. I would argue, now I understand there's reasons why on both sides of the ball, but I would argue that through 5 games as a whole, your least effective position on offense has been your offensive line, and your least effective position on defense has been your defensive line. Now, your defensive line is still good. Like, the defensive line has not been bad this year. They've been solid. linebackers getting way better, and the secondary has been elite. So a line-driven program, you could look at the two different sides of the ball and say, but your lines are arguably your weakest spot. I would say they're the weakest, but no one can tell me. You may argue another position. Some people say quarterback, but it's in the conversation. I think we can all at least agree it's in the conversation for being the weak spot on both sides of the ball. That has to change. It has to change. Because on defense, it's like, look, something's got to be your weakest, right, Trevor? I mean, something's got – but I would argue – but there's a big gap between what the D-line has done and what the secondary's done. The D-line needs to close that gap. Needs to close that gap in a big way. And if they can, you know, I don't know how you move the ball on this team. I really don't. Agreed. I mean, it may seem hyperbolic, but I don't know how you move the ball on this team. And they don't play like any like elite offenses they play good offenses in the final 7 games. Georgia Tech's good offense. Army Navy are rolling right now. USC's a good offense, but there's no Ohio State 2022 on their schedule. There's no LSU 19. There's no Clemson 18 in like the playoff team. There's no T. Higgins, Justin Ross coming down the pike on your schedule. You know, there's no CJ Stroud on your schedule in the last 7 games. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no Marvin Harrison Jr. on your, I mean, you could argue you've played the best receiving core you're going to play all year, and you could argue that you might have played the best passing quarterback you've played all year already. And Tyler Shuck. I mean, we'll see what Miller Moss can do. Haynes King is the most dynamic quarterback that they play in a traditional offense, although Bryce Daly and the Horvath kid at Navy have been pretty freaking good in their offenses. But you get what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing, Trevor, is like if the D-line can just start playing better, this defense becomes truly special. And it starts in this game because I think you nailed it. This is an offense that's given up. They rank 97th in sacks allowed this year. They rank 100. Was it? I'm sorry. Sacks allowed, they rank 113th. In tackles for loss allowed, they rank 130th. There's only 134 teams in college football, Trevor. It's like I think I love that you said that. It's like the pass offense. If not now, when? You know what I mean? But that comes down to how hungry are you about this game? Are you looking at, this team sucks, we're going to do our – or you're like, oh, my God, I can't – I'm chomping at the bit. Like, I want to go out there and show that I'm this. I want to do this. I want to dominate. Like, that's the thing is where's your desire to just dominate? Doesn't matter who the opponent is. I want to dominate. I'm hungry to dominate. And I don't see – this team is like, I want to dominate if it's a good team. You know what I mean? Like, turn the light on when it's a good – no, I want to see you – every chance you get to step on the football field, you want to just humiliate your opponent in the right way, right? Not with stupid, gun signs and things like that, but just I'm going to dominate you because every single play I'm knocking your face into the ground because I'm drilling you. I'm just whipping your butt I'm beating you to the quarterback every play. Like that's the hunger I want to see from this defense. And I'm very curious how the Louisville game how they're going to react to the Louisville game. Because I saw it was not their best. It was actually, I would argue, the worst performance of the defense we've seen all season from an executing your assignments standpoint. I would argue that. I would say that they made more mental mistakes in that game than any other. They made up for it because, A, they're super talented, but B, they played with a ton of edge and fire. Just how a lot of young guys making mistakes. But if they can carry over sort of that fire, I mean, even Riley Mills, Howard Cross, like, R.J. Oben played hard. He was okay against Louisville, but he played hard. There's no doubt about that. If they can carry over that energy into this game, Trevor, then I think we will see this D-line for at least this week take a big step, and hopefully it vaults them into being fired up about next week because the next 2 games are going to be huge for this D-line after Stanford, and they need to get some kind of positivity going into that matchup against Georgia Tech and Navy.
100%.
So let's talk about this specific matchup, Trevor, because we don't know what version of Stanford is going to show up on Saturday. I'm assuming that Ashton Daniels is going to play. But if you're Stanford, you got a really interesting decision to make because you can't beat Notre Dame without Ashton Daniels. 0 chance. 0. But you probably only got about a 5% chance to beat Notre Dame with Ashton Daniels unless Notre Dame just doesn't show up. Right? Do you risk him potentially getting hurt again, this time maybe worse, against the best defense you're going to face all year. And, oh, by the way, he got hurt against the second best defense he's going to play all year because he was getting beat up a lot in that Clemson game. Do you risk saying, hey, we're going to sit him out this game as well, let him get healthier because we've got, we've got a chance to, coming out of this, you got SMU at home and you got Wake Forest at home. Maybe you can kind of get some things going a little bit. Or do you say, hey, let's put him out there not 100%? But I'll say this, their offense is not very good right now. It's really not good when he doesn't play. And so, we pulled up a lot of the rankings that they had. A lot of those rankings, they were never great on offense this year, but a lot of that came down to this past game. I mean, they went for 258 yards in the game. They only had 3.9 yards per play. They had 103 less yards at home against Virginia Tech than they had on the road against Clemson. That's not because Virginia Tech's defense is lights out. It's because they didn't have Ashton Daniels. Now, I don't know that they would have won because their defense couldn't stop Virginia Tech, but it would have been a more competitive game. He's a good, solid quarterback, but for them, he's the key that makes everything go. And if he doesn't play, they're in big, big trouble, Trevor.
Yeah, Ashton Daniels is the key to that offense's success. Ashton Daniels to that Stanford offense is what Riley Leonard was to Duke's offense last year. If he's not in, the offense just doesn't go. And I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly. Now, I don't think that, to your point with Ashton Daniels, I don't think Stanford has a crazy chance to win. It's definitely not zero, just based on what we've seen,
If he plays?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, correct. That's why I said 5% if he plays.
Yeah, totally. And
I would take Andrew Hendricks over their backup quarterback.
Yeah. I'm with you. I just, with Ashton Daniels, he does a lot on the ground. He is a dynamic playmaker. It is no secret that Stanford is better when the ball is in his hands. He's the team's leading rusher as far as carries and yards go. And as far as rushing attempts, not too far behind him is their backup. Now, he had 19 carries against Virginia Tech, and I think he has 37 on the season.
Because that's what he does. He's their short yardage guy. They bring him into every game in short yardage situations. He had a fumble against Clemson early in the game because they brought him in I think it was like third and
right. Yeah.
I think, and he fumbled it. I mean, that's what they do with him.
Yep.
Yep,
100%. So, it's going to be interesting to see what the Stanford offense looks like with or without him, because this is by far the best defense that they're going to face. Clemson is definitely the second best, but Notre Dame across the board by far is going to be the best defense that Stanford faces all year. So no idea what they're going to be able to do without him. With him, game plan goes around. I think he's number 14. Game plan goes around Ashton Daniels for sure.
I gotta say, Trevor, they have two freshman running backs on their team that I like. I do. I now one of them is, you had mentioned in a text to me that one of them, the Micah Ford kid, is questionable because he left the game against Virginia Tech with an injury.
Yep.
He's a good little back. Yep. And then the other kid, Chris Davis, is again a pretty good running back. I mean, you look at the Micah Ford kid, he's got 230 yards rushing in 5 games. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. Chris Davis is averaging 7.2 yards per carry. Now, you may say, that's not lighting the world on fire, but guys, their leading 3 rushers last year averaged 2.8, 2.7, and 4.1 yards per carry. Stanford last year averaged 118.6 yards per game rushing, 3.5 yards per carry. This year, they're at 157 yards rushing and 4.2 yards per carry. And that was with them only going for 136 against Virginia Tech because, again, they didn't have Ashton Daniels. They rushed for 236 yards on Clemson. They ran for 173 at Syracuse. They're decent for that level running the football because the quarterback is a weapon. But when you focus on 14, as you said, Ashton Daniels, then you're not paying as much attention to those 2 freshman running backs who are good football players. And Clemson had that. Clemson was really locking in on him. And early in the game, Ford had a couple really nice bounces in that game. There was one short yardage bounce where Clemson kind of crashed down and he bounced it out for a nice game. He's a good running back. And the problem with those 2 backs is their offensive line's not very good. That's one of the issues they have is their offensive line's not very good. But we've seen some teams that don't have great offensive lines get a little bit of a push on Notre Dame with their run game. But if you don't have 14, then I mean, they become even more one-dimensional than they are, because now they don't have the ability to get the ball to their dude at receiver. And we'll talk more about him tomorrow. But it's not a coincidence that he had his lowest yardage total of the season in the one game without Ashton Daniels. It's not a coincidence, because the kid just can't throw the football.
Right.
So 100%. That's going to be the key. If he doesn't play, this becomes like almost an unfair matchup with the Notre Dame defense against the Stanford offense. It really does. So we'll find out. But if he plays, then this is going to be a good test for Notre Dame, who has not been a great rush defense this season. They're not bad. They're just solid, in my opinion. Some of it's kind of they give it. But if you have to contain him plus the two backs, now we get to find out if Notre Dame made some adjustments in the run game with their run defense. And that's something I'm very curious to see. So if we assume that he's going to play, and tomorrow when we break the game down, Trevor, we're going to do the matchup as if we expect Ashton Daniels to play and break it down that way. But just kind of looking at it here, when you talk about what we want to see from this defense, I want to see them be a little – I don't care that they hold teams to 75 yards rushing a game. That's not who they are going to be. I'm not going to ask them to be something that they don't want to be, right? It's like I can't ask you to live up to a standard that you don't have for yourself, and it's just my preference because at 46 years old, I grew up being told to be an elite defense, you have to stop the run. Okay, that's fine. You got to be a good run defense, but you don't have to be what it used to be because the game has changed. You know, like there's certain teams like, fine, you want to put all your resources stopping the run. That's kind of what we want you to do, you know? So in this instance, it's more about you got to be better against the run. And if Ashton Daniels plays, that gives you a chance to be tested by a pretty mobile quarterback and a pretty decent group of running backs, which is great preparation for what you're going to face next week when you got to defend Haynes King and Jamal Haynes and that group. And so that's why I'm actually kind of hoping that Ashton Daniels is healthy and plays, because he's going to give you a great look for next week. Now, Lamson's actually a pretty good athlete. That's why they bring him in as a runner. But he's like zero threat as a passer, in my opinion. And so it doesn't really give you a look, because Haynes King's actually throwing the ball pretty well this year. Like, he's improved as a passer. And he's got some pretty good weapons. So you kind of hope Ashton Daniels is healthy in that regard, just because he's going to give you a good look. But I do really want to see how this run defense performs coming out of the break with sort of a new look group. Because if you think about it, the guys that are playing now at defensive end should be more run guys, like Josh Burnham and Junior Tomaka are kind of more run defenders first and pass rushers second, and makes it kind of interesting. But that's my thing for the defense, Trevor. I need to see this defensive line or I need to see this defense just give me a little something more in the run defense, just a little something more. And I'm curious to see what the game plan is going to be from Al Golden against a team like this. You know, do you just say, hey, listen, we're going to bracket number 10 and just kind of take him out of the game and then they got nothing? Or do you say, hey, we trust Morrison and Gray to go against them one-on-one, and we're going to, you know, put an extra hat down in the box to make sure the quarterback doesn't hurt us running the football? Like, it's going to be interesting to see how he comes out and defends Stanford. Like last year, he just said, hey, I'm going to trust in my corners to match up against this guy. And I think they did well, but they had some miss. I mean, they had the big wheel route out of the backfield to E.J. Smith that went for 50-something yards. There was just some stuff like that happened. You're just like, what are they doing? And so, yeah, number 13 is the receiver. But that's the thing, Trevor, is I want to see number 10's Emmett Mosley. I should know that. But that's what I want to see is, like, what's the game plan? What are you going to do schematically to match up against this defense, which is a little bit different? I mean, it's a very different offense structurally and schematically from what you just faced. Because the last two teams you've played are pass first, run second teams, especially Miami of Ohio. This is a polar opposite. And they're a run first, run second, throw the ball to, you know, A. Manor, and that's pretty much where they're at. That's their offense.
Yeah, so their offense, outside of the handful of running backs they don't have a lot of depth. They're not going to do a whole lot of rotating players in. I mean, speaking of rotating players in, I am going to be interested to see like situational rotations for Notre Dame's defense on Saturday. and what that's going to look like with the more limited depth that you have at defensive line. It does help that Josh Burnham is coming back, but I'm going to be interested to see, based on what the strengths of those players are. To your point, Junior Tuialamaka and Josh Burnham are more like run first stoppers. So going to be interested to see who comes in on those third down, obvious passing situations. Now, depending on who starts for Stanford at quarterback, I don't know if they are going to have obvious pass situations because their backup quarterback is just not throwing the ball is not one of his strong suits. So we're going to see what that looks like. But yeah, I'm interested to see overall, but Notre Dame's defense again has an opportunity to go out and prove again why they're one of the best, if not the best defenses in the country.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So that's really it with them, Trevor. It's just, okay, do you show up and play hard? Do you play with fire and energy? If you do, they're going to keep Stanford in check. How much do you keep them in check and, focus and all this kind of stuff? But I'm also very curious to see what kind of jump the young linebackers make with a bye, where they kind of get a look at film and stop and think and, talk through things. And, does that help them get better? Do they take a jump? All that kind of stuff is, Christian Gray's going to have fresh legs after, Macy missing the last 2 weeks since he didn't no game this past week. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of what they do. And there's a lot of young kids that you never know with young players, Trevor. Sometimes young players look at a bye week and it's like they're not focused. They're not locked in. It's like, cool, I get away from football. And then others are like, hey, I want to get in the lab a little bit and see how I can improve my game. And, I never really thought, because things are just happening so fast, you don't get to do a lot of reflecting. Like by the time you get to Monday, it's your film's on next opponent. The great thing about a bye is you get to say, let me look back at those 5 games and kind of see what I did and see where I can get better and see teams keep doing this to me. And every time they do this to me, I fall for it and I get beat or something like that. So I'm curious to see what kind of impact that's going to have about this group as well, with Drake and Kingston and Jaden Osbury and hopefully Jalen Sneed and those kind of guys. It's going to be interesting to see how they perform, because if they build on what we saw this past weekend, meaning just clean up some of the mistakes, this linebacking core is going to be it's already been fun to watch. It's going to be even more so coming down the stretch. So, all right, Trevor, we did have a super chat before we get out of here. We had a super chat from Mark 1. He says, thank you for the super chat, Mark 1. He goes, like what you guys do. Hope you enjoyed the pictures I sent back home on my visit back home to South Bend. So, Mark, I am not sure. I don't know if you put some pictures on the Facebook page or what. I'm not quite sure what pictures you're talking about, but hopefully you had a pretty good time with all being back home to South Bend. So I'm sorry that I did not get a chance to see those. And I will go look for those, but I'm not sure. I am a little backed up on emails, so maybe that's it. Maybe send an email, but if you could point me in the direction of where you sent those, I'd really appreciate that. But I definitely appreciate the super chat for sure. For sure. I appreciate that very much. So, Trevor, that's going to do it for today's show, man. So, big game this weekend. It's going to be fun. We're going to dive even deeper into the specific matchups of Notre Dame and Stanford tomorrow. Not so much the big picture, but the specific matchups. But I got to tell you, man, I part of me wishes that this weekend's schedule was the last weekend.
I know.
Because there was crazy upsets this past weekend, but this weekend's just going to be just as far as better teams. So, dude, it's Texas, Oklahoma, Penn State at USC. You've got Florida, Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU, Iowa State at West Virginia, K-State at Colorado. Even Friday night, the Utah State at Arizona State game. We're going to talk about these on Thursday, but there's a couple Big 12 matchups where I'm upset alert. With some of these matchups in the Big 12, there's 3 games that you could see a ranked team on the road in a game where you're that's not going to be an easy win. So, man, I do wish I had a chance to watch more of that live this weekend. Alas, I will not, because I will basically be at Notre Dame from noon to 8, 9 o'clock. So, but man, it's going to be a fun weekend for Notre Dame and the rest of college football.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to have to silence the notifications on my phone. We have a family dinner with the in-laws. It's my mother-in-law's and my grandpa-in-law's birthday on Saturday. So we'll be back in Cincinnati. And I think the dinner starts at 7. So
yeah. So
I'll have to silence the notifications on the phone so nothing gets spoiled for me. But I hear you. Yes. I do wish this slate was this past. Yeah.
I'm gonna be texting you like crazy with updates from the game. Oh man, did you see? I'll be even giving you fake updates. Like, oh my gosh, did you see that play from whoever? And yeah, I can't believe Oklahoma looks this good. They're actually down 30. So have some fun with you.
Just stuff that would never happen. Can't believe Jeremiah Smith has 200 passing yards in the first half.
Yes, seriously, Oregon is locking Jeremiah Smith down. He can't get open. He's got like 3 catches for 2 touchdowns. I'm gonna have some fun with you. So anyway, but hey guys, that's gonna do it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, normal time tomorrow. I'm not gonna get into it, but just a really rough weekend at our house, and so we needed some time to recover today, and so we got started a little bit late. But tomorrow we start at 1. Thursday we'll start at 1. Friday we'll start at 1. And that's definitely the plan for the rest of the week. And we'll have a little different lineup for you for the post-game show. As Trevor alluded to, he will not be part of the post-game show on Saturday. But we're going to have some fun, Trevor, and hopefully Notre Dame goes out there and gets another win, proves the 5-0, and that gives them another shot. Because you've basically got 3 games before the first playoff ranking comes out. Because the playoff ranking comes out during the Tuesday after their bye.
Yep.
So it's the Tuesday before the Florida State game, which starts their last 4-game stretch, because it's Florida State, Virginia, Army, USC. So the first playoff ranking comes out the week before the Florida State game, so after their bye. So you got Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy left to make an impact on the playoff committee with what you do, not what happens to other people, with what you do. Right. So it is an important stretch. It may not seem like it, but before you know it, we're going to be sitting there having a Tuesday night show breaking down the playoff rankings. And so you may not like it, but Notre Dame has to have that in mind when they're, Marcus Freeman's making decisions on, okay, when do we stop throwing the ball? When do we put in our backups? How great are we going to be? Like, how bad do we want to bury this team? Those type of things. You need to do a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. To be honest, you have to do a little bit of that. So we're going to find out if they're able to do that. So that's all the topic conversation this week. Tons of Notre Dame Stanford talk. I'm excited about it. I know Trevor's fired up about it. Appreciate y'all being with us, folks. On your way out, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, make sure you head over to our premium board. That's the place to be, the VIP place at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.